I got caught in a very serious case, £100 million, half a metric ton of cocaine.
You had very unique ways smuggling your bits and pieces in.
They have to get guys that can think like me, paying off bent old Bill. I had bent customs who used to just clear the containers.
Gang warfare, guns being pulled.
You can get drawn into a conflict that will get your life taken away from you. They tied him up with barbed wire to a chair and hacked him to death with machetes. Turned up at the meeting, got shot in the head, put in the boot of the car, set on fire, went over the bodies, discharged further rounds in to make sure everyone was dead and drove out of there. I'm accountable for all the lives I've destroyed, all the drugs I've brought into this country. A lot of kids have been brought into gangs, probably a lot of blood on my hands as well. It will end in death, destruction and misery. It does not pay. The price you pay, you've lost your kids, you lost your family, you lose everything. When it goes, it all goes.
How many years did you get away with smuggling? I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors, Gold Seal. I use their products every single day, and now I finally get to work with them. I use their products for anti-inflammatory, reduced anxiety, better sleep, and mental clarity. I'm going to put a link to their website in the description, along with a 10% discount code for you to take advantage of. Go and have a look at their website, see if there's anything in there for you. I hope you enjoy this week's episode, and good health. Andrew.
Liam, how are you, mate?
I'm good, thanks for coming on.
Good, pleasure.
Now, I know you've lived an extremely eventful, colourful life, and I know that you've shared your story many times across the board. I've always been fascinated with your story, but we will skim over it. But because of the life you've led, I know you've got so much value to give the audience when we take a deeper dive and sort of reflect on certain aspects and how we can. I think we want to send a message out with this interview that crime doesn't pay, the consequences of crossing the line, knowing when you've crossed the line, but without me steering it from the very, very offset. Take it back to your early beginnings, where you grew up, how it all began, and that transition from straight to bent to completely crooked.
So, yeah, my life, where did it go? I think I have to start basically where I grew up, how I grew up. Because people will be expecting some sort of, traumatic childhood and, this sort of terrible upbringing. It was completely not like that. It was challenging, to say the least. My father, he was from the East End. He's a bricklayer. He done his national service, came out. And my grandfather before him was a bricklayer, very much East End people. My mother, completely, the opposite, came from the other side of the world, Jamaica, when she was, I think, 19, 20 years old, one of that very first Windrush generation. She came to this country to be with her husband at the time. She was married in Jamaica when she was young, had a daughter, my sister Beverly, and she came to England in 1951 to be with him. It was a very abusive marriage. He used to beat her, but she gave back as good as she got. Feisty Jamaican woman. And she left him and met my dad. And at that time, you could imagine, it wasn't something which was normal, particularly a relationship with a black woman and a white man. That was almost unheard of. So they had their challenges, so it was a very eventful upbringing, but it wasn't a horrible one at all. We had discipline as well, not from my dad, but from my mum. She wouldn't mess around. The days of, you can't beat your kids. She would literally, she grew a plant. She had a slipper. She grew a plant in the back garden. It was a swish, I think it was called. The stick thing used to grow in Jamaica. It was like 10 times more stinging than a cane. And if you used to fuck around, excuse my French, you knew you were getting that, So, it was...
Six to the best.
That's what it was, yeah, literally. So, that was kind of where I was at. I went to school. It was a mixed palette of friends I had. Early school, I went to a local school in Stoke Newington, and it was a lot of, kids who were immigrants and, Jamaicans and all the other variations that were coming at that time. And then I moved from that school onto another school, which was more white kids from Islington. And again, I had friends at both, and this was a time now I was starting to experiment finding music and sort of, different things, and started by the age of about 12, 13 to experiment with weed and things like that, and, start misbehaving a little bit. But, I didn't really excel into what I would say, more serious crime until I sort of got to around about sort of 17, 18, By then I was well on my way to, going down that sort of road.
Why?
To be honest, I was insecurity because I did go through different things at school. I went through racism, okay, and that was quite a strange one because people didn't realise whether I was white or black. So I wouldn't necessarily get stick from white kids alone. I would get stick from black kids as well, thinking I was white. And rather than being able to identify a pathway into something which would stabilise you, I looked for anything, basically, and usually what you tend to do is turn to the bad of things, and that's what sort of made me sort of, become like the kid that would do bad shit. But, after that period, if I'm completely honest, it wasn't about being gullible. What I then done was actually calculated. Now, not many people would admit to that because you think everyone wants to do that feel sorry for me story, and if it wasn't for this, it wasn't for that. The road I went down in crime, I chose to go down. I calculated, I went down there and I stuck to it for 35 years. So that could sound horrifying to a lot of your viewers, but I'm straight, I'm honest. I say, listen, I'm an honest crook. So I say, yeah, this is what it is. There's nothing dressed up or made up. Music was a love to me, and I think music inadvertently took me into a road or into a spiral that you couldn't have possibly imagined, because when I was growing up, I had a great love for, and I still have, the black music, which is urban music, was reggae at the time. Around the area, it was predominantly around sound systems. I had my own sound system. We played like blues parties. So we were bending the law then by breaking into houses, squats and...
Putting on illegal raves?
Shebeens, they were called back then. Rave didn't exist.
Ah.
Yeah, they were soul blues parties eventually. They became...
What are they called? Sublimes?
Shebeens. That's an Irish word, shebeens.
I've never heard of them.
You never heard of that? Well, that's where the blues party concept, the naming comes from.
Right.
The concept of blues parties, actually, in Jamaica... In the 50s, you used to have sound systems that play like yard dances because of the heat. You'd be out in open areas. When West Indians came to England, the Windrush generation, because you wanted to be able to at least, experience some of your culture, be able to get together with people who, had come over equally, the only time you could socialise was on a Saturday night. And because there weren't really clubs at that time, what people would do is they have a house party, and a house party would be basically charged admission. They would cook West Indian dishes. They would obviously sell, alcohol, and they'd have what they call a sound system play. It wasn't until 1956, strangely enough, that, to my knowledge, it was my parents actually that had been involved in the first club that played West Indian music in his country, and that was. In 1956, my mum and dad lived together at this time, and they lived above a shop which was at 60 Green Lanes, Haringey. And my dad's good friend, who he knew, Billy Hill, not to be mistaken with the very well-known villain Billy Hill, him and his wife Sadie wanted a club, and my dad said, look, you're never going to get a licence being black. I'll be the director of the club. And he got him a music and dance licence, and that was the first black music club, to my knowledge, opened in London. And, so that was a starting point for it all. And then, as I said, so I wasn't born then, but the fascination with being connected to music was always very close to me.
In your blood.
Blues parties, I knew the history very well. I had, family members and extended family members who were deeply involved in the whole music scene. So I naturally progressed into it. So by 1988, when I, got involved in the warehouse parties, what a lot of your viewers will probably, recognise and know me from, I was seasoned, I was experienced in this stuff, going to the houses, setting up these events, and the changes in music, going from reggae, which was dominantly kind of black thing, and then you went across and into jazz funk, and then suddenly you had loads of white kids coming to the events. So this was a mix over the casuals and the black kids mixing together, and then you had soul blues, which was, preceded the whole scene that grew from there, which, as we know, there was a lyric beat coming from Ibiza, and there was house music coming from Chicago, but stuff was actually born and reared here prior to that.
So when you got into the rave scene, you immediately turned that into, you monetised it.
All what happened was, when I was involved in the warehouse parties, I started a brand called Genesis, which was, one of the biggest brands, but we'd partnered with another organisation called Sunrise, and they were a huge organisation. And, we basically put on a lot of big parties. We had a great period of events over the winter of 1988, up to the spring, early summer of 89. And at that time, I wasn't involved in drug trafficking. It wasn't until the parties started to fade because the parties were getting raided every week. It was no longer becoming viable or sensible to do because you were, rather than making money, you were now quickly starting to, in a reverse mode of losing money. And and this is where I decided, I made a calculated risk and thought, if I'm going to take all the government heat, if I'm going to potentially go to prison for organising parties for a pittance, I might as well just actually get involved in drugs because that's where the money was. I had all the contacts. They were basically, built over a period of years because you could imagine hosting the biggest parties. It meant you had access to everyone that initially was involved in the drug business around that, around those events, around that club scene, around that whole, space that was there, so to speak. And I decided I had the connections initially to get involved and to get merchandise, which meant I could have a big distribution network, which I opened up. And then eventually, I thought I want to step further, get closer to the source of manufacture. And then I utilised friends that I knew, I grew up with, who worked on the markets, worked in places where, products and produce was coming in every day, and simply applied that to getting material ecstasy tablets into the country. And it was just really something that I sort of went to, saw a business opportunity in doing it, and then, delved into that.
Well, that's very different to a lot of people's stories. Some people, they dip their toes in with low-level bits and pieces and it escalates. But you made a decision, I'm going to go straight in for the big time, kingpin level, and whatever it takes to get there, that's how you're going to get there.
You see, people do things differently. I remember the first time I ever...
That's ballsy.
I remember the first time I ever actually got involved and handled drugs, right? And I'll tell you what it was, as simple as that, because most people, they'll get involved and they'll buy an ounce of someone and they'll sell a few bags. First time I ever actually handled drugs, it must have been about 13 years old. A fella I knew who was working at, one of my parents' properties, a painter, Jamaican guy. He said to me, I overheard him said a guy had come back and the guy had £5 of Jamaican weed he'd smuggled back in his suitcase. And, I knew kids, white kids, black kids, who, parents sold weed. And I thought, hold on. And I said, how much, for the weed? And he was like, I forget what it was at the time. It might have been about £500, £600 a pound, Anyway, I was like, okay. And I spoke to a white friend of mine, funny enough, and he was like, yeah, I'll take it. And I think he said he'd give me £1,000 or something like that, a pound for it. I got the £5 or the £4 of weed, put them together, and opposed to taking the profit I'd made, what I'd done was said, no, give me the additional weed in profit because I knew it'd be worth more. And then I gave it to someone who then bagged it up into these little bags, which they used to put buttons in. You know what I mean? Tiny little zip bags, they were called, Ziploc bags. He bagged it up in, I think, £3 or £2 drawer. That's what it was back then. And then, started putting them out and selling them for me. So even in contrast, it was never a point of, I want to be a drug dealer and I'm going to, kind of take drugs and then start, getting little drugs and going on the corner and selling them. I was never really about that, I was like, if I'm going to do anything, I wanted to be at the distribution point of it,
Like I say, it's a ballsy move to actually plan, that's the route I'm going to take, rather than accidentally fall into it. You had very unique ways of smuggling your bits and pieces in. Smuggler's mindset. I mean, where did that come from? Did you sit there and plot and scheme and think, or did it just come naturally? Because tell me some of your famous techniques of smuggling stuff in.
There were so many.
Not that we're giving people ideas.
Yeah, well, listen, there's no such thing as a new technique, and people seem to think, oh, he's giving away all the secrets. You're not. Because for people to think that the police and the customs don't know all of these things they haven't done before is an illusion. The reason why people still get through is there aren't enough police or customs to patrol them or to search everyone or to check every container or every lorry, right? But they know virtually every single move that's being done. And, when I finally got my hands on public interest immunity papers, which are top secret documents that people don't even know exist, which are, created by different enforcement agencies on smugglers and criminals, When I got to read some of those, for years upon years, they've been tracking me and what I've been doing. And the amount of times they literally, they'd either seized drugs or they'd, infiltrated phones and they knew what was going on in different methods and things like this, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge me. So they just keep going until they kind of get you, hands on, or someone close to you hands on. When they come down and you get the cuffs on you. But in terms of, planes, trains and automobiles, that's the only way I can describe it, every single thing you look for. So the first route you look for is what is normal. And then what is normal, you say, what is a trade route? Something that happens every single day, because what it does is it flies under the radar or it becomes normal practice. So if you look at fresh produce and you're smuggling from somewhere in the Caribbean or South America, it's common sense. Every day people get, fruit and food products, okay? They're perishable goods. They have to come through pretty quickly and be cleared pretty quickly. 9 times out of 10, in countries of origin, it's quite easy if you've got some people there to, infiltrate the docks, pay people who are, willing to take a backhander and, access that cargo or whatever you need. Most of the time, a lot of the time, the legitimate owners of that cargo haven't got a clue what's going on. I mean, containers would be packed. They'd have them on the wharf sitting there, and we used to have workers who would then go on, and back then you could do it. You can't do it anymore, but you get a forklift. You used to be able to push the pins at the back of the container door, lift off the container door without breaking the seal, take off a certain amount of boxes, literally put yours on the back of it, right, and then lift back the container doors so they sit back in. So what happens when the container arrives here and arrives at the wharf, customs look at it, it's an unbroken seal. Because the company it's coming to is very credible, been important for God knows how many years, they give them a green light. Think Route 5 they put them through. And then obviously if you've got someone there, a barrow boy who works on the company, all he's got to do is entrust it to break the seal and, do what he's supposed to do or paid his 200 quid a week to do, and that's pull the boxes off, put them in storage or sell them to the customers. Well, of course, he was selling them to the customers because we send someone down there in the morning, he'd pull the boxes off, he'd stick them into a corner, you'd turn up with your thing, you'd buy a bit of this, bit of that, he'd pull back out those boxes, load them with the other produce, take them down to the back of your lorry and you're away without the owner legitimately having the first clue what's going on. I mean, but that was just one method. That was a day-to-day method. We found so many systems, obviously with people who are coming, travelling, we always had an out for people as well. We used to sometimes board someone to get on the plane. We'd load a suitcase full of material with them to come over with, but we'd also put another case on there, obviously. So one case is packed with gear, the other case is their clothes. Combination lock. If they're bad luck enough, they comes around, if customs stop them here at Heathrow or Gatwick, they say, open the case, they give them a combination, the case don't open, they jimmy open the case, it's full of gear. Of course, they're arrested, but they start preaching, what are you talking about? I don't know, I've never seen that before in my life. They're there for a few hours, they're questioned, interrogated, and then suddenly a few hours later when everyone's left that particular part, you've got this other case going around the carousel. So they go back up there, they pull that case, bring that back, then suddenly, that's my case, identical to the other one. Of course, you give them a combination and they're dirty washings in there from the holiday. And of course, the customs are sitting there with no physical proof, because how could you as a passenger on a plane be responsible for putting that on the plane, do you know what I mean? Besides your luggage. So there was always acts we'd create in situations like that, but I didn't really like dealing with passengers and things like that, because something could always go wrong. Under intense pressure, they could break. So, we tried to do mainly cargo, and that was air freight, on planes as well. And there were variations, again, we could use by putting them into cargo bins and putting them in various parts of the plane. If you had people who were working in flight, let's say, for instance, who's responsible for cleaning the planes. Some of these things could be loaded, like the bin. You used to put a false bottom into the bin that used to be wheeled off of the plane. Had the guy that used to service those, used to be able to pull them apart once they left the airport. Had an engineer one stage, used to be able to get anything off a plane the size of a small fridge. But you have to remove a panel. The panel had to be removed from the plane. You'd stick some rucksacks up there. You'd go on the plane in the night, maybe even let the plane come in from Montego Bay or something like that and let it actually leave again and go to a less, hot country like a local European country, then come back and then send him on there to retrieve it. So anything humanly imaginable we, had access to. And of course, the Mecca was, we got to one stage where I had Bent Customs who used to just clear the containers.
The phrase, everybody's got a price.
Yeah. Very true.
Is true.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A lot of people think they wouldn't do anything that would jeopardise their liberty or their livelihood, but proof's in the pudding.
Let me tell you this, right? And people have to understand this. People generally do have a price. It's nice to think there are people who haven't got a price in this world, but it's a sad world we live in, and people do have a price. And sometimes people are put in these jobs, and you got to understand where their heads are at. Because, for example, when I was an active criminal and you had certain kinds of police, what was described as elite police, who would have to go and get guys like me. They have to get guys that can think like me, okay? And guys who can kind of fit in with me. So these kind of guys are on the edge anyway. So when you've got these kind of people and you're giving them jobs to have surveillance on a guy like me, and then they're sitting outside your ass, they're watching you have beautiful meals going out, they're seeing beautiful cars pulling up on your drive, they're seeing you go and buy lovely watches and clothes and all this kind of stuff, and they're sitting there in the rain eating cold sandwiches, and they're getting, 30,000 a year, 40,000, 50,000 a year, whatever that is, and they're reading documents, what they see, PII documents, and they see you're dealing with millions, tens of millions of pounds every day. They're seeing all this stuff going on. They're sitting there. It's a matter of time before they become vulnerable. And if opportunity arises, they're straight in your pocket.
How would you go about getting them in your pocket? What would make you think now's the time to strike, and you know that they're not going to rat you out?
Well, that's not even a normal situation how that occurs, and we've had a few different situations. Two very classic ones I will give you was obtaining a whole team of Bent Customs officers. That actually came in through an ex-military guy we had who was then given a job in, believe it or not, police anti-corruption. And his job basically was to, do surveillance and intelligence on police he thought was bent. They moved him from there to a customs elite unit. So his job then was to look for corrupt customs. But what he decided to do was he looked for corrupt customs, but when he found them, he'd approach them and say to them, right, I know you're at it. Here's what I've got to put in front of you. I'm not going to get you nicked. I've got people that want to go to work. I want you to work with them. It's as simple as that. So they set a price and then they basically control what you want to do. So if people are disillusioned with how, and it's an interesting point for you because I'm sure your kind of view, a lot of your viewers will like this, how unsafe our borders are in terms of control, okay? But let me say how easy it is, right? And this is when people say they're going to crush people smugglers. Beware, right? Now, you have a situation whereas a container comes in from a country, any country in the world, right? When that container arrives and lands here, you would think, what procedures would it go through, right? Well, you've got X-rays, you've got all these various things. But let me tell you all it takes. To move a container full of explosives, people, drugs, it wouldn't matter, right? Because one man working on a computer can simply ask the person when it's leaving, what's the container number? Every box has a unique serial number. It gives him that number's tapped into the computer, and it says, don't touch that container, which means border folks can't even touch it, right? So that container arrives at a dock completely free, right? It arrives. When it arrives, he then controls it again because he then puts on there, it's going for an X-ray. An X-ray isn't a little machine what you think it is. It's a long-standing X-ray. It's a lorry 40 foot long with a thing on top of it called a boom arm. The boom arm then, the lorry stands beside the container. The boom arm then goes from one end of the container, like that, to the other. The guy sits in the back of that lorry and he watches it on a screen. If that man in that lorry or that team, as they call the freight and smuggling team, are all involved, right, only 4 men, all they got to do is the guy that sits in the back of that lorry sees it full of everything, people, drugs, bombs, doesn't matter, right? All he turns around and says, it's clear. No photograph, no proof, it's clear, right? Certificate is issued. You're notified by the broker. You go up there with a container head, give them the bill of landing, and you pull it out of there, and you're gone. That is how simple it is to bring a container, a 20-foot, 40-foot, 60-foot container into this country. And almost any country, actually, for that fact, right? So that in itself is, probably devastating to people who listen to this, because when you hear that, you think, are you joking? Well, no, I'm not joking. And to bribe those people isn't a hard task. So once you've got access to those, if you're going to turn around and you've got money to spend, which you have got money to spend, you say, I'm going to charge you £1 million a container, which to most people will seem like a lot of money. But if you can fill it with drugs, it's absolutely pittance, okay? Those people get £250,000 a head, or they break it up between people who help facilitate it, whatever they do. They're going to come up with a couple $100,000, worst case scenario between them. That's a lot of money for them, what they're paid in wages. And that's it. And it's never reported, it's never done. When people say the amount of drugs coming in the country, you haven't got a clue how much drugs is coming in the country because you're not catching it, right? You have not got a clue what people can get through the door, right? If you've got access to clear it. So that's one set. Yeah, these are your front guard, okay, that hold the fort, right? Then you've got your elites. So your elites now are a different gravy, because your elites, these people now are privileged to information. They create intelligence. So when they now see a case, we had one case particular, where an elite who was basically caught this lot out, who were clearing a container, right, and then nicked everyone, which I got nicked, so did 6 of my co-defendants. Of course, they don't want to nick these people down at the wharf, because they nick the people at the wharf, the customs officers. The case is shaky, because the minute you turn around and say, they're bent, and he proves that they're bent, it jeopardises everything. Plus, you think the amount of gear they've cleared, the amount of people sitting in prison who are locked up for this 50 key, 100 key, 1,000 keys of puff, and they've cleared their containers, or not cleared them, they've in fact discovered drugs supposedly on their containers, then they're going to go and give court and give evidence against them, and then they're nicked a year later or 2 years later for bringing in drugs themselves. Every single person in prison who they've come in contact with has an appeal, okay, which they will win, which means all these sentences will be overturned. All the money that they take in confiscation orders will have to be repaid by the government with interest. Tens, if not hundreds of millions of pounds. It will break the criminal justice system. So they turn a blind eye, and it's called noble cause corruption. That's how the system works. Always has worked like that. But when you've got the elite teams now that are going after guys who are making money, they create public interest immunity documents. These are documents that are created by different Interpol, DEA, Customs and Excise, NCA, Metropolitan Police, different units, squads, Metro, the whole lot. And this intelligence is shared, and things are given different grades. So it says, it's come from a phone tap, come from an informant, and they classify the different ratings of the intelligence, how reliable it is, okay? So they see things and they're privileged information. On one occasion, they picked up a piece of intelligence that said one of my co-defendants had 9 million pounds in euros and dollars in the boot of one of his cars sitting somewhere in East London. So when he sees that coming across in a PI document, he's in charge of case, him and his close team, and they suddenly see another set of bank police that have been paid off, which they know have been paid off, to clear this in the first place, and they're in a position of thinking to themselves, is it even worth it, right? That's how the approaches are made. So when them 4 who are running that case just say, you know what, let's get into them and say, if they give us 300 grand or 250 grand, we'll destroy the case.
So when Keir Starmer says he's going to smash the gangs,
Ridiculous.
how out of his depth is he?
To catch a smuggler, right, you have to be a smuggler, all right? If you can circumvent a system, right, which you can do, because use drugs as the perfect example. You're never going to stop drugs from coming in the country. So you're not going to stop anything else from coming in the country, because smugglers will always operate around a system. So it's like, the door's closed, here's a closed door. You don't say, knock, knock, can I come in? You climb over the wall, you go through the door, you go under the door, you find a different method, and you always find a method. There's a saying, organised criminals are either working or planning. So it's always a matter of time and another method. And that is the name of the game. So unless you've got people who can operate so swiftly, so sharply and so dedicated and can be uncorruptible. Uncorruptible is a magic word.
Yeah.
Okay? You'll always have a problem. Even if you can magically get them at this end uncorruptible, you're still going to have the other end you've got to contend with. But mark you, it does give it a 50-50. You're taking the odds down. But when you've got both ends that are working, the system's blind to it.
And to put it into perspective, how many years did you get away with smuggling?
I got involved in smuggling from about the age of 24 years old. And let's be honest about this, I got caught in a very serious case, £100 million off a metric ton of cocaine, which there was a very famous documentary made about in 2007. And obviously I was fired. He did catch up with me, catched up with me in 2013. I paid my comeuppance for that and for perverting the course of justice, paying off bent old bill. But the reality of it is, that period of time, you're talking about excess of best part of 30 years.
That should raise serious concerns with people that are putting their trust in Keir Starmer to stop the gangs.
Well, listen, people are career criminals. Just like a geezer will get up and go to college and go and get himself a job and progress. Criminals get into the system. They learn from older criminals. They go to prison, they learn, and they have a career pathway. Not so much now, because young people are just, they don't look at it like this now. They've got more interest in shooting and killing each other, which I've always had a clear saying, right? One drop of blood costs more than 100 kilos of cocaine. Because that price, not only is it, destroying and taking away people's lives, which you cannot do without a clear conscience, you can't have because you're smuggling drugs in the first place, but the heat that brings down from the police, from everybody, the community, it is not worth it. You cannot turn and say to yourself that you're involved in crime and you're making a living out of crime and you're going around killing people, because it doesn't work. The two do not mix, as much as people think they do.
Yeah. So before we get to when you went to jail, because at the moment it all sounds glamorous like it always does, raves, illegal raves, smuggling, tens of millions of pounds, living a high life in restaurants. But with all that must come gang warfare, guns being pulled. On the documentary that I watched, your partner Wayne said he was kidnapped 3 times.
So, right. So,
give me the downsides of all the criminality you got involved with before jail.
I'll give you downsides, okay? And I'll give you serious downsides. First of all, there are two. You've got 2 sets of places. You got abroad, overseas, where you're involved in drugs, and you got Britain, okay, where you have local criminals. Partners I've had abroad. One of my very close business partners, a guy by the name of Albert Bonner, Blackadouche they called him. He was what was called a constituency don, all right, in Jamaica. We worked together, made a lot of money together over the years. And on one occasion, it was 2000 and I think it may have been 2002, if memory serves me correctly. I wasn't in Jamaica at that time. I'd come back to England. And he went for a meeting with someone in one of the constituencies in Jamaica, which was what they call Garrison, right, which lower part of the ghetto, right, with another person they classify as a don and another person who is also described as a don. Community leaders, we call, they have influence with local politicians, but they obviously have a lot of influence with those constituencies, so they help stuff ballot boxes and get votes, right? So they have power in terms of smuggling and criminality. He went for a meeting. I would have probably been there with him just for the sake of just being in his company that day. He went to meet a guy called Willie Huggett, where his supermarket is, the road going in. The three men were sitting outside having a drink on the, corner of pavement. A car drove down there in broad daylight. Two guys got out with automatic machine guns. It was a white Corolla. They were wearing white shirts. They very much looked like Jamaican CID, okay? So automatically, Blacker had a weapon on him. He produced his weapon, so he's a licensed firearm holder. The other two didn't have weapons on them, which is very suspicious, and I'll tell you why. Anyway, as he done that, they lifted the AK-47s and they shot three men to pieces, basically, went over the bodies and discharged further rounds in to make sure everyone was dead and drove out of there. If I had been there, which I could have easily been there, I would be dead today, okay? What's more serious is when you're playing at that level, these guys had a lot of influence in the constituents in the area. So what it meant was, how could a car drive through there and come back out of there without looking like a cheese grate with bullets by the local guys? Because obviously what happened was, and what my understanding was, one of the individuals had been working with someone who was connected to some Colombians. They ripped the Colombians off in America. The Colombians didn't let it go. They had access to a more senior police officer in Jamaica. And what they then done was had information from him to say a raid was going on that day in the constituency, which means, because everyone's got corrupt police out there, so Willie's police or Blacker's police would have said, don't have any firearms in there that day, there's raids going on. And the place was cleared of firearms. So what happened was the guys went in there, committed the murders and left. So corruption and, murder and someone losing their life is an everyday thing. Here, an occupational hazard is just going to prison probably, and you might get killed now because that's the way things are going. But if you're in that business, it's an everyday thing, and you'll see people die and you won't blink an eye. Many people I've worked with, another guy I knew who went for a meeting, he'd done something he shouldn't have done to someone, turned up at the meeting, got shot in the head, put in the boot of the car, set on fire. Another guy, and this was just completely insane, I knew, and funny as strange, I had a friend who was on the run here, and I sent him down to stay in my house in Jamaica, and every day he was down there enjoying the beach, enjoying the villa, and this guy was going by to see him all the time. Luckily, a week before, my friend came back to England, and this guy decided, because my pal wasn't there, he went by to another friend who had a car rental business, completely not involved in the drug industry, nothing like that, took him down to a meeting in New Kingston. Two guys then who he met, who he believed was going to do a drug deal with, had no intention of doing a drug deal. The guy had a gold Daytona watch. That's what they wanted. They tied him up, both up with barbed wire to a chair and hacked him to death with machetes for a gold watch. So these are the environments and people you deal with when you're talking about being a drug trafficker. That's there. Here, yeah, you've got people who will do what they've got to do, and you're dealing with villains. And if you're honest about it, you're a villain yourself, because you've got to be that way. If you're living in that environment, you've got to be part of that environment. Now, this whole kidnapping thing with the whereabouts parties, it was a ridiculous fabrication that Wayne made up, I think, because he to sell a book. And what made it worse was, and this was like the most staggering bit, when I had my big case in 2007, I was given a book deal about the case. And of course, the case was, my defence was I was smuggling cigars, which obviously now, that we have a different version of that event, as the police have proven. But also, obviously, the document slid under my door by some secret society. We now know, because I've been nicked for it, that it was Bent Police that I bought those documents from. But in the mix of this story, I had my friend Norman Parker, who'd Rick Parker's told was double, done 28 years he'd done for double murder. He was a writer, and I thought, I've never written a book. I asked Norman to ghostwrite a book for me. He ghostwrote the book, and he took part of Wayne's book from it. But he credited Wayne rightfully in the back to say Wayne's book was a source, basically, in the acknowledgements. But then I hadn't read the book. None of them I hadn't read until I went to prison in 2013, and the prosecutor was using the book to prejudice the jury against me. So when I sat and read the two books, I was like, what the fuck has Norman done? He's written all this bollocks about getting kidnapped by gangsters. All what happened, right, was two of our very close friends one day went by for Wayne. They went by his mum's house in the morning. There was a heated discussion that had been going on between some football lads. And what happened was they had to go and sit down to get it all rectified. Some other guys I know very well, you know, within a little group of them, went down to some guys who run a boxing gym in East London who have been able to sort out problems and ran a security company. And they sat him down, and during the meeting, with fear, because Wayne's there, turned up on this meeting with people who will probably do him serious harm, broke out crying and give away 50% of Genesis, which was my organisation. Of course, that was put straight, and they didn't take 50% of the parties, but he created it as a kidnapping. It wasn't a kidnapping. You're not getting wrapped up and things put over your head and all sorts of things. The other occasion, again, I know that was just a load of bollocks. I think another lad turned up and, you know, maybe owed him some money or something like that, and his guy just said, look, you know, you're going to have to sort the money out again. But people fabricate these stories, as I said, for no good reason, because the real stories are actually better because they have merit and credibility. So all that was nonsense. Don't get me wrong, people was kidnapped during that time. Nothing to do with us, but there are people that did go through things. One of them I actually know because I spoke to the fella and said, he's nicked my story, that happened to me. So he took that and coined that and used that for himself. But, you know, if you speak to anyone, right, we was all friends. Do you know what I mean? Like, so, as I said, so that I'll put that to bed here and now. That never happened. That is a categoric lie, you know? And what made it worse was the fact that Norman had probably copied a lot of this stuff and put it in my books. So I was almost endorsing it. But what I'd done was I think it was 2017, I wrote the publisher after I'd read it. From prison, I managed to get the rights reverted back. I took that book out of circulation, okay, and I sat there for 3-4 years, literally every day, writing. And I wrote a 150,000 word manuscript called Empire of Dirt, which I've now only this kind of last week and a half given to my literary agent, who's now going to submit it to publishers. Because the story and the history of what happened back then, it was a great time politically, it was a great time musically, it was culturally a wonderful time. Lots of things happened. And if you're going to distort history and make stories up and give people this, you know, perverted almost version of events, they'll never get to experience it because these ones who are reading it are too young to have been there. So I'm about being a historian of the history of what's happened and telling the story straight as it is. You can ask me any question. I don't shy questions. Do you know what I mean? I invite them.
Well, talk to me then about how the empire come crumbling down and then life in prison, because you've done Belmarsh, Whitmore, which is a lifer's jail, all different. So I'm sure, I mean, you're great to interview because I could just sit back and just suck it all up because you've lived a hell of a life. So how did the empire come crumbling down, and then what was jail like? Because these are the things that people that are considering crime or parents that have got kids that are getting into crime need to listen to real clear, innit?
So to any young person, and I say this, as glamorous as all these things seem, as fabulous as it all seems, it is the biggest mistake anyone can make in their life because it will end in death, destruction and misery. And how that will look is it will be a very long sentence, okay, where not only will you serve a long sentence, if you manage to accumulate anything, the government will take it from you in a confiscation order. You'll come out of prison an old person having to start all over again, right? If you're lucky. If you're not so lucky, you can get drawn into a conflict that will get your life taken away from you. Plus, not to mention all the suffering and grief you put through and burden you become to people you supposedly love and care for. But on a conscious level, and it takes a while to get there, it did for me, you have to reflect and look at the damage and destruction, devastation you're doing to all your victims because it's not a victimless thing.
When you were smuggling, did you think it was a victim?
Of course I did, because in my mind, I was so self-absorbed in making money and thinking about myself as most criminals do. You don't consider it and you make excuses for it. And I'll tell you the thing, Liam, right? This is how rehabilitation happens. And you've got to understand, so people don't get it. That's why the country such a state is with rehabilitation. First thing is this, and I blame this on a number of different people as well here. This is part to do with the system we've got. As a criminal, you get caught, right? The first thing you're going to do is you look at a big sentence, you're going to go not guilty because you think yourself, you know what, I'm going to fight this case. And you sit there on remand, could be a year, 2 years, 3 years. In this case, there's 4 or 5 years waiting list, by the way. That's how bad state the criminal justice system is in, and that's a fact. While you're sitting there, you sit and you fabricate this story. You wait for the disclosure to come, you tailor your defence, and by the time that grand finale turns up, you've actually convinced yourself of your defence, okay? I actually had a cellmate for a period of time when I was in Wandsworth, 2006, yeah, a guy called Henry Freegart. They made a film about him called The Rogue Agent. This was the guy that pretended to be an MI5 man, okay, and conned all these women out of money. Well, this scumbag, right, he actually helped me fabricate a story, right, of cigars and create a great defence because he was a top con man, right? Now, everyone on different levels will create their defence, okay? They tailor it as best they can. Disclosure comes, they create it. Then you have a situation where you go to court. Now, it might turn out all right and you get found not guilty and you go home. And all is forgotten. You go back to do what you're doing until next time. However, it goes wrong and you get a sentence. You forgot. You've made up a story and you believe what you've been told and you think you're innocent and you're walking around prison, certainly for the first 18 months where you're going through the appeal process, and particularly all these young guys who are doing these huge wrecks, because anything you've got is a little bit of hope you might get out on an appeal. You continue this lie. So this lie isn't helping you progress. It's not helping you get through the system. And you're carrying this thing on your shoulders and on your back until you've believed to yourself that you ain't done nothing wrong when you're as guilty as sin. It makes you go around hating the system, right? Because you feel that you're unjustly in there, right? And you're delusional. And what'll happen is you'll serve the time bitterly, you'll come out, you'll do the same thing again, you'll go back again, and it's a repeat circle, right? Rehabilitation doesn't come into it. That's the first thing that happens. The second thing is solicitors have a lot to do with this because particularly when these kids are on murder cases, and this is what I just think to myself, they get paid a lot of money for those cases. They're the big ticket cases, right? So murder and terrorism, two biggest tickets, right? Unlimited purse is given for those on legal aid. Now, when they go, they get top QCs, you're entitled to silks, so they can come on now, they can represent, a case can go on 3 months, 4 months, some of them silks are on 3-4 grand a day, right? Solicitors are making fortunes because all the disclosure, they get paid by the sheet, what they're reading. There's loads of legal visits coming up. They've seen you 2-3 times a week. They're charging for those. So there's a massive taxpayer bill coming in, right? They love it. They're getting paid for it. But worse than that, they're disillusioning the kid who has done something. They know they've done something, but they believe they're going to get off. Sometimes solicitors just say, listen, you're fucked. The evidence is too overwhelming. Go in here now, right? You know, go and get your third off, or murder case different, but throw yourself at the mercy of the court, right? Get your sentence and start to progress and think about how the next 5 or 10 years are going to look for you in prison and progress through the system. They don't. They hold them on to get as much money as they can. They throw them to the wall for the last minutes. They get a bigger sentence than they already got. Then they're in there again, bitter, believing they're half innocent because they're held on with appeals for a few more years. They're putting all their family through that, their girlfriends, you know, their parents, and it's a horrible system, how it's been designed. What I done was, on this occasion when the wheel fell off, something happened to me, and it wasn't finding God, as most people that change find religion, or there is this pinnacle moment. My pinnacle moment came actually walking around a prison yard when I saw 2 young lads that I knew. I knew their parents, and they were arch enemies, parts of postcode gangs. And I was like, what's happening? Why you think he's like, no, they talked to him, he killed so-and-so. I said, listen, I know your mum and I know his fucking dad. Yeah, you grew up as almost like you could be classified as cousins, because when I grew up, Never had babysitters. We used to get dropped around in your uncle's house, and then, you'd have all these cousins, relatives there, and you knew each other. You grew up with each other, right? Whether they was a cousin or not, you tagged them as a cousin, right? So the hostility wasn't that bad, right? But now people are separated. They're divided. I mean, it's sometimes done deliberately to create this animosity between them. And I said, what is this postcode stuff? I just want to understand, what is it? And it first was uncle, maybe because I'm old, or maybe it's a bit of respect there. I was like, uncle, I love every single brick on my estate. And I said, but you don't own any of it, and you never will. Why are you dying for it?
And killing.
Why are you killing and dying for it? Why are you sitting in prison doing life sentence for it? And the question is unanswerable, because they're sold into this mentality, and young kids who haven't got any money, right, who are, pushed against it, right, and not necessarily for any fault of their own, they're born into a state of poverty, or driven that they have to be part of something. And older kids bring them, this is classic grooming now, right? It's called poverty grooming. And from a young age, there are guys that will get a kid in for a chicken meal deal for he's there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, £5 or £10 a box of chicken every day. By the end of the week, they come at them, you owe me 50 quid. Kid ain't got 50 quid. What do you mean 50 quid? I can't go and tell my mum that. All right, you got them, right? It's as cheap as that. Then it's a pair of trainers, and a pair of trainers is the price, well, can you hold on to this gun? And then it's a tracksuit, and a tracksuit is the price of, here's a G-pack of drugs, take this phone, and you've got a line. And a kid now has grown into something they know nothing about. They're putting themselves at risk, and they're cannon fodder, right? But don't just look at it even on that level. I look at it, companies like Nike, companies like Adidas, who's producing trainers, producing T-shirts, producing tracksuits. The kids this stuff's getting groomed, and they're buying it with money they ain't even got to try to show off. They're going on JD Sports, and they've got to wear this, they've got to wear that. And kids are getting robbed for these things as well, by the way, if they walk through the wrong estate, right? They should be going up and turning around and saying, we're going to go and we're going to give 1,000 tracksuits away to kids on the estates that do these courses to better themselves, these courses in sand, media, electronics, bricklaying, building. Give something back to reward them for doing the right thing, rather than let people who are going to bring them to do the wrong thing take your products and use them to do bad things in. That's why it breaks my heart is that people don't step in, right, and think these are our kids, regardless of being white or black. They are stuck in a poverty situation where there's nothing for them, okay? And unless we're prepared to be brave about it and accept, well, the government's not going to do anything to help them, why don't we turn and say, if we can make these kids a bit more civilised and bring these kids into a bit more compassionate and respect the area a little bit more, not because if someone walks in, you want to chop their head off, but you can welcome them coming into the area like we did as kids, yeah? That's when we see change, Liam. And it sounds like a big thing, but I started it in prison. We started something called One Postcode. I was seeing the kids coming in, and then every minute the bell was going off. A friend of mine, a very well-known armed robber, man by the name of Clifford Hobbs, we called him Mumbles. He was a scapegoat in prison. He was double Cat A prisoner. White fella, 6 years older than me. It was like, and what is going on? Why are these kids doing this? We went to the governor and said, look, this is madness. This can be stopped. You've opened doors to problems the system cannot deal with, okay? And you haven't got solutions to the problems. Let us get some of these guys together who are coming in from the dispersal system, who are lifers, who are all gangbangers, who we know, and let's bring them in first. Let's deal with their problems because they themselves haven't been properly, understand what their issues are. And let's get them to mediate these problems. So when the kids were coming in through the first night centre, we were sending them down there to call them out, say, look, don't tell us you're not in a gang because you are. I'm not a screw, because I know a screw's going to tell the police, you're going to go to court, you get found guilty, that's aggravating facts, that's another 3 years. Let us know because we're going to put you on a different wing. Then we're going to, within a week, have a sit-down between two more senior people from those areas, like things used to happen in the old days, and we'll squash the beef while you're in here. They're going to do life sentence, most of these kids anyway. Once it's squashed, right? What it means is it's a safer environment for people visiting the prison. It means you haven't got to restrain and resource on the prison by having 3 officers having to walk around with one person every day they leave their cell, okay? It's a safer environment in terms of the officers are not going to get caught up in the middle of this. It's a safer environment of the people who are in that prison for whatever he's locked up in that prison for. Maybe ain't paid his tax, maybe ain't paid his television licence. I don't know. He can walk around without a fear of getting cut with a razor from a gangland problem. So a simple solution to a problem, the truth of the matter is these kids don't want to, they didn't want to go and kill anyone and certainly not serve a life sentence. They don't want to kill themselves. They got sucked into something at a young age and it's too late once you're on that road. So when you offer opportunity to say, look, without losing face, we can squash that beef. The deal is, the minute you fuck up by you attack someone in there or you do anything, what will happen is you're out of that list, you're out of the programme, and when you get sentenced, you will probably end up in dispersal. You will end up in dispersal, where everyone in there's a murderer. Everyone in there would hesitate to wipe you out, right? And that's a different world altogether. And of course, it was a massive success. It went without saying. At that point, I realised it worked. I myself went up the road. I got sent into dispersal systems, even for being that, because I made my bed, I had to lay in it. I'd done too much to the system to aggravate them, to piss them off, and was always this guy who was aggravating character. I was going to have to pay the price. But I'm a big man. I expect that, and you deal with it. That's occupational hazard of being a criminal. Yeah, you're going to get time at some point. It's what it is. Just get on it and deal with it. But what I'd done was, earlier on, I thought, I'm a clue finder, I'm an earner. So what can I do with the next 6 years of my life? And it was like, I'm going to fucking learn this because 10,000 learning hours is what makes you an expert authority on the subject. If I'm in here 24 hours a day, I'm active 10 hours a day in fucking prison from the day that door pops open. If I put 7 or 8 hours in a day for the next 3.5 years, I come out, I'm an expert authority in the subject. So I've done. I would have got myself a job in every single different department of that prison, right? From resettlement to healthcare to becoming a listener. And I worked my way through all the different activity hubs, right? And I'd done that and I moved myself from a category A prisoner to the stage of a category B prisoner to a category C prisoner down to a category D prisoner over time. The minute I walked out of that prison, I wasn't going with a begging bowl. I went and became an expert authority. I could sit across the table tomorrow morning with a Minister of Government for prisons and I could tell him what he doesn't know because I've lived experience he ain't. Yeah, I've been and I've done time. I know all the different things in a prison, where the flaws are, what doesn't work and why it doesn't work. Now, these are the kind of people that should be working in the prison system, not the people that get a little chub change every now and again, because some of the lads are good lads. They set up a little charity, little CIC. They've got a great idea they leave prison with, and they've got an impact and effect. But who gets the contracts for new prisons? I'll tell you, 3 companies. Sodexo, G4X and Serco, right? And part of their remit is to go, oh, we're going to bring in some small charities and they're going to give you a tiny little break of bread, okay? The smallest amount of money they can give you just to say that they fitted this social corporate responsibility as a big company. But they should be giving these smaller organisations a slice of the cake because these ones will go in deep. If you get shot with a gun tomorrow morning, don't put a plaster on the wound. You need surgeons to go in and remove that bullet. What they're trying to do is patch a bullet hole with a plaster, yeah, and it can't be done. So our prisons are in a terrible state, worse than you could even possibly imagine.
Explain the state of prisons in the UK at the moment.
Prisons
in its reality.
In its reality, it is staggering, okay? And when I say staggering, overcrowding is one issue, but the fact of the matter is people are not given the opportunity, okay, to rehabilitate, right? They're not given an opportunity to do it because they hardly come out of their cells. Prison officers are paid pittance, right? And they aren't putting their life online for a job, okay? That you know, if something happens to them, their family are left up shit street without a paddle, right? So, and then, yeah, I know what you want him to say, is there radicalisation in prisons? Yes, of course there is. But there's all stuff that goes on in everything, right? And there's a balance to all this stuff, right? So, yes, there is a lot of radicalisation. There is a huge Muslim population in prisons. But you understand there was a big IRA presence in prisons prior to the Good Friday Agreement. The Muslims that were in prison were treated horrendously in prison, right? So there's patterns of power and things take over. The postcode gangs have pushed it because the conflicts these kids have, they cannot afford to have conflicts with everyone. So if they convert, they are relatively safe from conflict, right? So you call it what it is, that's the reality. But a lot of people do find religion and it does help them. A lot of people don't, right? They do it as convenience. Now, that's plain and simple what it is. And I'll give you another big shock as well. What should they do when someone gets caught with a knife? And everyone's sent to prison for life. Do this, do that. And I'll shock you. Do you know what should happen when a kid gets caught with a knife twice? What they should do? National service.
I think national service should be brought back, period. The way the youth are now. Lost.
You have a caveat, they can't go to war, because some people don't agree with conflicts that this country go out on, and so do I not agree. Some of the places they go, problems they inadvertently create in other people's countries, right? But the fact of the matter is, my dad done national service. Lots of people of that generation done national service, and they got a trade. Because people don't realise, when you join the Army or the Navy, you can go and get yourself an electrician's trade. You can go and get yourself a trade. You can actually not only get a trade where you can go and get a living for your family and come away from selling drugs or come away from getting involved in street crime, you can actually change your circle of people you're around. You can't go and have a pair of trousers halfway down your arse and a baseball bat turned backwards and tell a sergeant major, give me 5 or spud me, man, because it ain't going to work, because it's discipline, yeah? And once they learn discipline, which they will learn, because you can't break the army. You can do what you want with the police. You can do anything with any other organisation. You cannot do with the armed forces. That's why they're the armed forces. But what it'll do is once you turn someone and you change their mindset in a way, actually, I can have value. I can, be of service to myself. They just might just say, well, actually, I can also be of service to this country.
How do you water down a young man's ego? Because I'd imagine a lot of violence and murders are driven by ego. How do you water down a young man's... Because it's hard for an older man to put his ego aside, let alone a young guy full of testosterone. There must be a technique, because we're going to talk about the AP Foundation as well, because that's like a real honourable thing you've done. So you can kind of merge it into the two.
Well, how do you do that? And as saying, my dad told me something years ago, you cannot put old head on young shoulders, okay? What happens with people, and rehabilitation is age. Most people, over a period of years, the older they get, that's their stage of rehabilitation. That's what changes them, okay? Because you lose the fight. You get tired of constantly doing it, the same thing over and over again. You look at life differently. A young person has an ego, because particularly now, social media flares it. Social media is one of the biggest problems we have in this country. I get it, free speech and all that, but how it's being used with, rage bait, all these kind of things, that's incites violence, all these kids killing each other. Do you think these kids that are doing these videos, and I see them all the time talking about going to stab and kill and murder and maim, and I see it in the Old Bailey, the prosecution's playing the video, that's what gets them convicted and gets them a life sentence. 9 times out of 10, they want to be a musician. They actually want to be an artist, but they haven't got a first clue how to enter into that world. No one gives them the help or the guidance how to do it. All these kids who are selling drugs, listen, Elon Musk once said that 90% of drug dealers know more than business professors. Fact, okay? Because they're selling products which they can't really advertise on market. They sell out of it all the time, right? They have back accounts, restocking. They understand good basic business principle, okay? If you give a young person something to do that engages their interest and it lights up their spark, they will do it. It's a distraction, but you've got to get someone who they admire somebody they look up to do it first, okay? We look differently at life. We look at it, how do you walk through a minefield? And my answer to that is look at someone who's walked through it first and follow every single footstep they've done without getting blown up. A young person doesn't. A young person looks at it and says, well, this person has got this, he's got a car, he's got a watch, he's got these things. And they look and do what he wants to do. 9 times out of 10 on the estate, to have those things is a drug dealer. What they don't realise is a successful drug dealer on the street, their idea of success is a relatively all right car. When it's all right car, I'm not talking a Bentley or a Rolls Royce, probably a BMW or a Mercedes convertible, a reasonably nice watch, a pretty girlfriend and some holiday photographs. That's the extent of his success, okay? When it goes, it all goes. They take the car, they take the bloody watch, the girlfriend goes after a little period of time. The pictures, yeah, they'll stay in your cell for the 10 or 12 years that you're doing, right? But that's the extent of that life. If a geezer wouldn't got a career as a plumber, do you know how much he would achieve in those 7 or 8 years after he qualifies, does his apprenticeship, he sets up his own business, he gets his house, he gets a mortgage, he gets a car, he gets the wife, he gets stability, he gets a life these guys really want at the end of it, but it's setting off about it in the wrong way. We need more mentors. We need more people who are prepared to be success stories. We need people who are coming from the face of it. They've been in the, you know, you've had your head in the lion's mouth and taken it out. You've been there. You can say, I've done all this. I've done it. I've done it bigger than you would ever imagine. And I'd be a success story in that world. But I'm telling you now I'm a failure, because it all amounts to nothing. The devastation, damage that I've caused trying to be that guy is not worth it. So telling you now, if you've got a brain in your bloody head, which you have, why don't you look at doing a business? Why don't you look at, you know, set up a fashion label, which is incredibly glamorous? Why don't you become a record executive? Do it the right way. A photographer I know, he said to me, Andrew, he said, you know what? He said, me and my brother go all over the world. He said, I remember when I was 18 years old, I got a photo shoot to do with 50 Cent. He said, we was there, all these girls smoking these zoots. He thought, this is the lifestyle that these rappers are dying for and kids are killing themselves for. I'm a photographer. I'm taking photographs. I'm living this life. He's never harmed a person in the world. His life is a camera. There are so many kids with stories to tell and artistic avenues to go down. Okay, we haven't got the first idea what this country has to offer with young people. And the young people do not understand what potential they've got. And unfortunately, we look at people in a very bad way. We look at people first, we judge people before we even get to know people, right? A kid walks with a hoodie, instant thing is, stay away from him, is a gang member. That could just be fashion. But you don't know, you can't take the chance, right? We need to be a society that we can turn around and say, we are a giving, caring society. We care for young people, regardless colour, creed, religion. We care for them. If they've got nothing, we will help provide. But we're going to help, you're going to help yourself, because by you coming off of this hamster wheel of, you know, poverty and negative cycle and it's prison, do you know every £1 spent on rehabilitation, the government saves £6.50 to the taxpayer? Every £100 is worth £650. Every 100,000, okay, is worth 650,000. Every million is worth 6.5 million. Every 100 million is 650 million. That's what it saves the taxpayer if they invest in rehabilitation of people, because reoffending costs you, me, the taxpayer, more money than is possibly imagined. But all we do is say, let's build more prisons, okay, because we're running out of spaces. Let's, you know, well, the hardest sentence thing is called changing, because it's not particularly working. But we're not looking at practicality and thinking, actually, we need houses. Big housing problem here. Why don't we look at these kids now, and why don't we train these kids to be bricklayers, plasterers, give them all these skill sets? Why don't we say to them, you know what? We want you in this sector, right? Here's a career pathway for you. You're going to build houses to help with the housing shortage problem. And those ones who are in hostels in terms of coming out of prison, those ones who are going to leave prison are going to be homeless, those people who are ex-soldiers are going to be homeless, and all the other problems that we've got, right? What are you trying to say? You know, you looked at as dregs of society here, right? Because you're coming out of prison or you're in prison. Let's give you a trade. Let's give you a skill, and you're actually going to build your own home. And you're going to build homes for future generations. And you're going to be the investment. Maintenance company will be, you know, ex-offenders. Who's the plumber? Who's the electrician? And you can come out on day release. You can do that, and you can actually service. We can have decent accommodation. We can have, you know, a system that works, rather than very rich people who do actually own all the big contracts and manipulate the contracts, because it's all done through government. Don't kid ourselves here. We pretend it's not a monopoly, it's a monopoly, right? And why don't we actually just break it, change it? So I say it's not it's to be an entrepreneur or to be successful, don't be ashamed of that. And to have a trade and turn around and say that I can, you know, do something, I can build stuff. I can walk and I can see buildings, I can see walls that my dad built. I can see buildings that my grandfather and my great-grandfather built. Do you know how proud that makes me feel when I walk around East End London?
Well, it was interesting when we was in the green room when you was talking about how proud you are of your roots, and which is why you stay exactly where you grew up. And I think that's what the country's lacking. Pride.
Listen, pride. But first of all, we have to invest pride in our young people.
I like the fact that you're calling out the elders, essentially, to set a better example.
You have to. Who's going to change it? Who can change it?
No, I agree.
Right? If we don't become accountable,
that's what this is about, what we're doing now.
I set up the AP Foundation purely for that purpose.
Talk to me about you've made my job so easy today. Thank you for that. And it's been interesting. But talk to me about the AP Foundation, because that's real honourable stuff.
So, AP Foundation, I reflected and thought to myself, this is something I want to do. I'm now qualifying myself into doing it. And I wanted to be able to make good of some of the terrible things I'd done. I am accountable for all the lives I've destroyed, all the drugs I've brought into this country, all the terrible things that have probably happened. A lot of kids have been brought into gangs, probably a lot of blood on my hands as well, undoubtedly, right? But it's about repairing it. My mother was a community leader, so was my father. They done things to rebuild the community. I done things that destroyed it. The AP Foundation, to me, was a way of starting to repair some of the damage I had done. It was never going to be overnight, but it was about bringing some good back and changing the system. And I said, the first thing I said is, all these guys that have got these charities that are going to have it really difficult, and they're going to have problems getting contracts and going into prisons and going into councils. If I could create a legal structure, because I understand business, I've been doing business from a very young age, a registered charity, and, you know, go out there and utilise some people that I known from when I'd done legitimate business, you know, if they would put their name to my foundation, it would give me a first step of credibility. And I went out there. You know what I'd done? Donald McIntyre, the journalist, had made a documentary about me in 2007, Cocaine and Coconuts. Probably expected me to get 35 years. I didn't. I asked him if he'd be a trustee on my charity. He did. He accepted. Right?
How about that?
How about that? Right? I went to another friend I'd known from the music industry for many years. He became vice president at Sony, Mervyn Lynn. And I asked him if he'd become a trustee. He agreed as well. And I asked another friend I know his son Josh Myers, who's an actor, and Martin Myers is a film executive, third generation film executive. He agreed as well. And that was the beginning. And now I have Manisha Knights, who owns MK Law, who's one of the most respected Asian lawyers in the country, an advocate, and is invested in changing the way things are, right? I've just recently brought in Andrew Orr, who's the managing director of Tro, which is a huge marketing agency. So people with credibility have all come along and said, do you know what? Yeah, you know, we'll put our name to this because we believe in what you're doing. And people I have around the foundation has caused a lot of controversy, you know, and people were like, my God, this person, that person, these people are career criminals. They're in the paper. Everyone can change. Not saying everyone will change, but example was we had a night exhibition. A friend of mine, Steve, and me came down, done some art. One of the paintings was Kenny Noy. We all know the history of Kenny Noy. One of the most talked about characters there is. Constantly put through the, you know, dragged for it with the papers. All right, hasn't got the best history in the world. Man's had 2 fights, killed 2 people, right? But the reality is, if you want a story and example of why not to carry a knife, right there you've got it. A man spent virtually the majority of his life either in prison or on the run as a result of having a weapon, yeah? So if you want to learn from that experience, take it as an experience that don't carry it, because it's not to be glamorised as much as the papers, the press and the films want to make it to be. That life is horrible. You've been away from your kids, from your family. You're demonised by the press constantly. One example, you know, and there are numerous ones, you know. Ray Betts, another friend, you know, who obviously was tagged for the Millennium Dome robbery. You know, Ray comes down, he gives his time with the foundation. He talks to young people and says to them, look, you know, this is not the path to go.
So all of these guys you talk about, including Kenny Noy, they're all remorseful?
All these people, John Toomey, the whole lot of them, people that when they look at them, Clifford Hobbs, it's like, you know, it's a rogues gallery. People are like, but these men are all in their 50s, 60s, 70s who have been there at the paramount of organised crime as the system sees it, and every one of them has the same message. Crime may pay in the short term. In the long term, it does not pay. The price you pay is your happiness. There is none. You've lost it all. You've lost your kids. You lost your family. You know, you lose everything. Plus, when you look back at it, and this is why my memoir's called Empire of Dirt, because we build things in this belief we're building these great empires and these wonderful things, and it amounts to dirt. We've built nothing, because all we've built is death, destruction and misery. So back to why I've done AP Foundation, it was a legacy project for me, so I could at least have something that I could stand proud of my parents and give something back. Because the worst thing she would want to see, my mum, to know what she went through coming to this country in the 50s, the stuff she put up with, to see those kids who would be the age of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren killing each other on a daily basis, fighting against each other. This was not, it was what it was about. It was not meant to happen like this. Do you know what I mean? But it's not just specifically that. It's the kids of working-class families who are born into areas that haven't got the right role models to help them out of it. And the role models they're exposed to are the wrong ones. And they themselves need guidance a lot of places, because a lot of them aspire to be guys like us. They're aspiring to be guys like us. They're aspiring to be the guy that has this or has that or has done this or has done that. They're not there yet, and they'll probably fall off the ladder before they get there and get a life sentence. But even if you're getting there, believe me, it's not worth it, because you will fall off the ladder at some point. And it's too hard to get back up, especially the further and the higher you get on that ladder.
Is this now your destiny? Will you carry on this road forever, do you think, now?
Look,
helping turning lives around.
How I see it, we're all here for a reason. My conscience became my guide, and it's my reason. It's what drives me. And it's cliche, make the world a better place and all that, you know, let's all hold hands and, you know, sing We Love the World. No, it's been practical. It's know that you can work out your street door, your kids can walk down the road and they feel safe because they're not going to get stabbed by another kid because he's wearing a hoodie. It's a place where you know that you can say you're doing something and, you know, you've made a contribution. Do you know what I mean? You're doing something, not just for you anymore, but you're actually giving something back. And that's a great feeling. And it's another the police aren't come and potentially kick your door down at 4 o'clock in the morning and drag you out of bed, you know, or you don't know if people, every person that's walking or a car is driving behind you, you're thinking, are they the police? Or are they maybe another organisation that's looking for you to pull on your drive and pop out and put one back in your nut? It's not a life that you want to be living anymore when you come to realisation of it. If you want to carry on doing it, and some people, believe me, do want to carry on doing it, but it will end one way, I can promise anyone that. I've seen it. I've seen the ups, I've seen the downs, and when it all comes down to it, you have to make a mark in life that you can be proud. You need to be proud of who you are, of your name, and record history the right way, not the wrong way.
And how many years have you been acting in a fashion that's made you proud? How many years have you been giving back for now?
Honestly?
Because, you know, it's like in a podcast when you've got a 90-minute slot, it could sound like your crimes were last week. But how many years have you been giving back?
So the charity's been going on for 6 years, okay? But I started actually, I would say, you know, a couple of years, 3 years into my sentence, I started. So 10 years I've really been, making what I think a positive contribution and planning and charting my way through this.
And your legacy? Do you want to be remembered as the man you were or the man you've become?
The truth of the matter is, I want to be remembered by my family. That's what I'm remembered by, as Andrew, who, is maybe some Ron's son, who, he's done all right for himself. I don't want to be up there as, this is Andrew Pritchard. Yes, AP Foundation, because I knew that by using my name and the notoriety I maybe had, it would help bring in young kids to pay attention and think, hold on, this isn't a government operation here. This guy, we know this guy, you know what I mean? I've seen this guy on telly. I've seen documentaries. I've seen him flash up on the news, right? So he's real. What he's saying, he's actually done. And that's the value of what my criminal past and notoriety has done. It's given that opportunity to say, this is the Andrew Pritchard Foundation. Okay, so we don't judge people here. Do you know what I mean? Because we've all done it and probably done a lot worse than you can imagine when you walk through that door.
I think that's got to be the first key in it. No judgment here, because we're never going to turn anything around if you feel like you're judged. So my final question to you would be then, if there's a youngster watching this, or there's a mum or a dad watching it, and either them or their son is in a gang, he's been sucked in, he's been groomed, he doesn't want to be there, what's the first step he should take to get out?
Well, the first thing they should start to do, okay, and it's difficult, very, very hard. The first thing is with parents. Parents should become aware at a very quick stage of their kid might be getting in a gang. And a parent, if a kid has drugs in their house and it's your house, you're responsible as the adult for that. So there's no harm in searching your child's room. If a child's wearing a pair of trainers that cost £200 or £300 and they're not working, there's no question you thinking something's wrong here. If you see them hanging around with kids who are older than them and it just doesn't quite fit, these are all the early signs. And that's why it's important. Well, what we do is we signpost. So there are organisations we work with and, individuals. You can go onto our website. We run a 24-hour line now. We can give advice, we can signpost, and we can try to direct or at least bring understanding to the parent, okay? Because it might not be nothing. The kid might just be, a young person, dressing, listening to certain music, having a certain kind of thing. If a young person is genuinely at risk, we try to signpost them in a direction that we can get them onto one of our courses, we can drag them away a little bit, bring them into mentoring, and assess the situation as best we possibly can. But that is something the government should be doing, right, with small organisations on a major level across the country.
Do you think the AP Foundation will ever get a government contract?
Probably not after this podcast, it won't.
What would your pitch be to them, though? Because there's no one that knows rehabilitation like someone that's been rehabilitated.
Well, I have done them. We've won a Serco contract for Fosse Way Prison. I've won contracts with big people like Maximus and, NGS and organisations which are the organisations that, kind of are there. But the reality of it is, these ain't contracts we need to have. The contracts we need to have is we need to be able to go and bid directly to government and turn and say, we are a Serco, except there's 50 of us all together as one. And we're all little guys who are all together, but we've got a structure here called the foundation that's organised. We've got the people who can handle the accounting and the accountability for you, the compliance. We can handle that, but we can get the kids or the guys on the street who will make a difference, that will go in and connect properly and will make a difference.
Well, I tell you what, now that I know what you do and where you come from, and my audience will, I'm sure there'll be times where we can get back together and talk about actual topics and subject matters that are current, that we can maybe make some sense of and give some value back to the audience. So this is a very nice introduction to my audience, to you, and I look forward to the next time we sit down and try and make the world a better place.
Thank you.
Excuse the cliche.
Thank you.
Good health, brother.
You too.
Cheers, mate.